Iran, through its ambassador at the United Nations, denies targeting U.S. forces. Over the weekend, 5 Iran-backed Iraqi militiamen were killed. The Pentagon claims they were getting set to target a U.S. base. Now, this happening as Tehran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen claimed responsibility for the hours-long attack of commercial vessels on Sunday in the Red Sea. An attack countered by the USS Carney. Washington is now discussing the creation of a naval task force with allies to patrol commercial shipping in the Red Sea.
We will continue as we go forward to consult very closely with allies and partners to determine and take all appropriate responses. We have every reason to believe that these attacks, while they were launched by the Houthis in Yemen, were fully enabled by Iran.
For more, let's go to London and Hannah Porter, Senior Research Officer on Yemen with the ARK Group. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
What happened on Sunday in the Red Sea, it really raises the stakes.
Yeah, it certainly does. This has been an escalation we've seen in recent weeks where the Houthis are targeting both Israeli territory and now ships in the Red Sea, both with missiles and with drones. It's the kind of escalation that would have been difficult to imagine just a couple months ago.
Why are the Houthis doing it?
This is largely a PR move and a propaganda move on their part. This is not so much a military strategy. So for years, basically since the founding of the Houthi movement, they have been adamant that they would like to engage militarily and ideologically with Israel, in theory, to liberate Palestine. This is a very large part of their propaganda and their ideology. Now they've seen an opportunity to actually launch attacks, and of course now they have the military capabilities to at least physically reach Israel with their missiles and drones, albeit not really do any damage, and they also have the abilities to target vessels in the Red Sea. So now that the opportunity has presented itself, they're taking advantage of it, primarily for propaganda purposes.
Now, there's been within Yemen kind of a lull of late. The Saudi press this Tuesday reporting worries that the Houthis might be trying to launch some kind of attacks on 3 major cities. Is this what I mean to ask is this kind of akin to what North Korea does when it launches missiles, which is attention-seeking behavior so that it can negotiate over something else?
It certainly is attention-seeking behavior, and it seems to be successful so far. I think that these strikes, these provocations come at the worst possible time for Yemen. In the past year, we've seen a de-escalation and the very early stages of the beginning of the potential resolution of the war, although it is very, very early on. There has been progress in the past year. These strikes threaten to reverse all of that progress, and I think that some very real questions need to be raised about the Houthis' long-term goals as the de facto government in northern Yemen. Do they actually want to govern Yemen? Do they simply want to provoke Western powers, Israel, the United States? They have been in talks with the Saudis that seem to be relatively productive, and the Houthis are very clear about wanting to pursue those talks, although they do not want to negotiate with the internationally recognized government of Yemen. But moves like this make it very, very difficult to make progress on that front. So now, obviously, the U.S. government is considering redesignating them a foreign terrorist organization. Under the Trump administration, they were designated that, and that was reversed. It is unlikely that that designation would actually have any negative impact on the Houthis themselves, but it would have a negative impact on Yemenis. Furthermore, the fact that these actions are taking place in the Red Sea near the Hodeidah port is a huge threat to humanitarian aid and development aid in northern Yemen, because that is one of the main ports that provides humanitarian aid to many Yemenis who are in need.
Gosh, Hannah, when you think back to the narrative of the last couple of years, that less oil was coming out of the Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, and now we have this standoff, this talk of naval task forces to escort commercial shipping. So the danger now really on both sides of the Arabian Peninsula. Is this the most volatile? And when was the last time it was this volatile in that region?
Near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, I don't know of a time it's been quite this volatile, although of course there have been similar task forces and Navy task forces provided by the US to vessels around Somalia. I don't think that this step is so dramatic. I think it's quite natural given the circumstances, but I think the larger question is how it's going to escalate from here. I don't think that this is the end of Houthi strikes or Houthi provocations in the Red Sea. They certainly have been very clear that these attacks are going to continue as long as Israel's assault on Gaza continues. So we probably will see further escalation, and it will demand some kind of action from the U.S. And I do think that the rapid escalation of all of this has maybe left the U.S. government somewhat unprepared and U.S. military unprepared. They don't know how to respond. They don't know what is appropriate. They do not want to be dragged back into Yemen's war, so limited military strikes within Yemen may be out of the question and also counterproductive. So it's very unclear what steps need to be taken to make it obvious that the Houthis cannot continue down this path.
Well, they certainly had a procedure on Sunday when it came to intercepting those ballistic missiles. Yes,
absolutely, and that was successful, but still, it cannot, as long as the Houthis are targeting vessels, it's going to be a threat to traffic in the area.
All right, and there's not wanting to re-engage in Yemen's civil war, but there's also the direct confrontation, or not, with Iran denying it's at all targeting the U.S. There's also been, on the other hand, this talk of an axis of resistance. So does Sana'a answer to Tehran in this conflict?
I would say it's more complicated than that. So what we've seen over the past 8 years or more is a very clear increase in Iran's support, both material and ideological, to the Houthis. In the early days of the war, there were certainly rumors that the Houthis were getting support from Iran. Now it's absolutely undeniable, and the Houthis make no secret of it. However, I don't think it's very helpful to consistently frame the Houthis as simply being an Iranian proxy. They do have their own motivations. They are a group that has existed for a few decades now. And I think that even if their ties to Iran were weakened or cut altogether, the Houthis would still exist and they would still be a formidable military and political presence in Yemen. And I think they should be considered in their own right, although their coordination with Iran and certainly some ideological ties are undeniable.
One final question on this. Since October the 7th, where does this leave another big player in Yemen's civil war, Saudi Arabia?
Well, Saudi Arabia has been put in another awkward position because the Houthis obviously do want to continue negotiating with them in order to achieve some degree of legitimacy and to ensure that Saudi Arabia doesn't continue or resume its airstrikes in Yemen. The Houthis also recently requested that Saudi Arabia open up space for them to make their way through Saudi Arabia in order to physically reach Israel and engage militarily with Israel. Obviously, this is not something that is actually going to take place, but you can see how the Houthis' propaganda targets Saudi Arabia and Israel and tries to portray themselves as being the potential liberators of Palestine. I think that Saudi is in a very difficult position right now, especially with the potential normalization of relations with Israel, and it will be hard to negotiate that moving forward.
Hannah Porter, so many thanks for speaking with us from London.
Thank you for having me.